So, okay, so hello everybody. Very happy to welcome today Atoosa Kasirzadeh, who is not only a philosopher but also a mathematician, and we did our PhD in mathematics together, and then she did more philosophical stuff than I did, which will be very interesting to hear about. So she will tell us about the existential risks with AI, with this view between decisive and accumulative risks. So you have the floor.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. And thanks a lot, Led, for inviting me. Double pleasure also to be here, to be invited by an ex-colleague and office mate. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this notion of existential risk. And basically, I'm going to defend or basically argue for a distinction between two notions of existential risk. And then hopefully throughout the paper, throughout the talk, you will realize why it's important to draw this distinction and what kind of problems introducing this distinction kind of can resolve. Next slide.
Okay.
Okay, great. Okay, so if you want to read more about this topic, you can just just scan this QR code. There's a archive link to the paper, and if you also have other things to do and you don't want to listen to the talk, you're waiting for the last kind of like the main lesson, I'm gonna tell you the takeaways from this talk. So if you have other things to do, you can leave. So basically, I want to say that like there's this conventional view about existential risk. By conventional view, I mean the view that kind of captures the imagination of the people, the public, when they think about existential risk, when they hear the word existential risk. This is a view about the existential risk from artificial superintelligence or artificial general intelligence. I'm going to say that this view overlooks how societal and ethical risks that also are referred to as non-existential risk can result in existential catastrophe or existential threats. So I want to say that conventional view about existential risk that overlooks the ethical risk is misguided. And for doing that, I'm going to draw a distinction between two notions of risk. And I do that in terms of two hypotheses. The first one, I call it decisive artificial superintelligent existential risk hypothesis, which basically says existential risk from artificial superintelligence concern the possibility of some abrupt large-scale events that lead to humanity's extinction or cause an unrecoverable decline in its potential. And the hypothesis that I introduce and want to defend, and again, has been around somehow in the literature, but hasn't been given like a philosophical kind of treatment. I call it accumulative AI existential risk hypothesis. And this says like AI existential risks accumulate through a series of lower severity disruptions over extensive period of time. And then collectively they erode systemic resilience until some stressor event triggers unrecoverable collapse. So I want to say this accumulative view about existential risk actually is very important. We need to take it into account whenever we work on qualitative or quantitative existential risk studies. And then here, yeah, just very briefly here, you see this kind of like visualization that I just put out just to kind of like highlight how these notions of risks might differ. Like I haven't like plotted real like data points, but it's just like the decisive view says, okay, suddenly we have this artificial superintelligence systems and existential risk from them is high. And then the other view, that the accumulative view says that it's going to go gradually. We need to think about it more gradually. Okay. So again, throughout these two hypotheses, I want to contrast and draw a distinction between two notions of risk. One is existential risk. Again, all of these notions will become clear throughout the talk. And the other notion is societal or ethical risk, sometimes referred to also in the literature as non-existential risks. Okay. So first, let's think about societal ethical risk of AI. What do I mean by that? Of course, since 1950s, when we had different kinds of AI systems, like more like easier, simpler AI systems versus logic-based AI systems, etc. There has been some people who were concerned about the risk of this system. So anytime there was a technology, introduction, new technology, there's been some people caring about the risk, societal implications of these systems. But in particular, since 2015, 16, especially after the success of like deep learning, like there's been a lot of like work on ethics of artificial intelligence, and this work on ethics of artificial intelligence has gone into like all of the like AI labs. Next slide. There are like a lot of conferences. And so, like, for example, one of them is this ACM conference on fairness, accountability, transparency. As you know, ACM is the Association for Computing Machinery, is a conference that typically has been only for computer scientists or any sort of science that has been around computation, but they introduced a computer science conference with cross-disciplinary focus. And people started publishing a lot of work in this conference. Another ACM conference that was introduced 2018-19 called Triple AI ACM Conference on AI Ethics and Society. People started writing a lot of cross-disciplinary papers, publishing these conferences, and the background of the people who kind of like would with these notions of ethics of AI, ethical risk of AI, ethical harms of AI, has been very diverse, from computer science, philosophy, human AI interaction, mathematics, economics, political science, etc. So very, very interdisciplinary conference. Out of all of these works, loads of different sorts of, let's say, intellectual artifacts came out. One of them were this kind of like significant work on the design of ethical standards, ethical guidelines, ethical principles. And so in this paper, like these authors kind of like go and do a review of the global landscape of AI ethics principles, and they just figure out that there are a lot of ethical principles. But these principles then gave rise to the development of a couple of standards by like IEEE organization, other organization. So that's been one of the artifacts. Another artifact has been a couple of other experiments. So here you see one of the most famous experiments called Moral Machines, that was designed by a couple of researchers, I think hosted on a MIT kind of platform. And so basically the researchers here try to look into how people would reason about the ethical dilemmas when we are having like some sort of autonomous systems in different kind of contexts. So I think a lot of you have heard about like Philippa Foot, and then a lot of the good work that she did introducing thought experiments, understanding ethical dilemmas, etc. So here people try to crowdsource the moral reasoning of a bunch of different people all around the world about different contexts. And the conclusion was that actually it's kind of like hard to say what does it mean to do an ethical kind of like decision in this specific context. And if humans can't say what does it mean to make a robust ethical decision, how should we expect it from autonomous vehicles, autonomous cars? Okay, then there's been a couple of other work like in industry, and also like a lot of open source projects. Researchers, computer scientists, interdisciplinary researchers try to develop different practical guides, like try to operationalize different notions of ethical AI. For example, they say, okay, we have these deep learning systems. They are very opaque. We don't understand how they work. So we need to think about how these systems can explain their decisions. And then a lot of researchers try to develop different techniques known as explainable AI techniques that would help us to kind of understand how the system makes decisions, and therefore maybe these kind of techniques would help us to make the systems, the reasoning of these systems, kind of accountable when they are deployed in different words. Similarly, like bunch of work on algorithmic fairness, algorithmic bias. People observe that a couple of these systems, for example, vision recognition systems, do not recognize with the same accuracy when they want to distinguish or know a black face versus a like lighter face, and then like a lot of people try to improve the quality of the systems. And as you can imagine, this work needs to be like really interdisciplinary. You need to understand the social problem, you need to develop some technical kind of solutions, and then these two kind of aspects go hand in hand. So basically then, most of the research that people have been doing, let's say since 2015, 2016, in a very concentrated way, has been done by this community of researchers that are broadly called AI ethicists. And in this term, ethicists, I think in this context is a little bit of a misnomer, because it really doesn't mean like ethics coming out of philosophy. It just meant, I think broadly, like people who work on the societal implications of AI and think about the risk, the societal risk and ethical risk that these AI systems kind of like bring about, and then how we can like stop them. So that's been like the main concern. Okay, so loads of taxonomies, loads of typologies of different kinds of risks, loads of ways to do the risk assessment for these systems. But because these days everyone talks about large language models, and I'm also co-author of this paper, I would just want to mention this one kind of taxonomy of different sorts of ethical / societal risks. So in this kind of like survey paper, a lot of like Google DeepMind researchers, and I was at that time an intern at Google DeepMind, looked into how the large language models can bring about societal harm, and the risk of these harms were considered as societal ethical risk. And so they kind of like looked into the literature, that the research that has been done, the research that hasn't been done, etc. I mean, there was some in-house also large language models, so people could play around with and just kind of like speculate about some of this risk. And they identified 6 different categories of this risk. The risk of harm from language models producing discriminatory and exclusionary like speech, like toxic speech against specific groups of people. The risk of harm from these language models leaking or inferring some true sensitive information, like in an unwanted way. The risk of these models to kind of like produce false or misleading information. Also the use of these systems by malicious actors. Then the way these systems can make users kind of trust them, get kind of like especially younger people or general all kinds of people kind of like getting addicted to these systems. And then also all kinds of like risk of harm to the environment and downstream impacts of these systems for labor market access, etc. So these categories of risk, when you look at them, were labeled as categories of ethical and social risk of AI. Okay, then we go to the age of course, generative AI, and in particular, like when the ChatGPT was released, a lot of new attention was brought to the notion of artificial general intelligence and artificial superintelligence. So some of the companies that are developing the best generative AI systems, like Google DeepMind, for example, here in their vision, they kind of very explicitly state that the vision of these companies is to build artificial general intelligence systems. And so when you look at the founders of DeepMind, one of them, Shane Legg in particular, he wrote his dissertation on artificial general intelligence. And so the idea of we're going to build artificial general intelligence in the next like 20 years or something was the founding, like was in the vision of these companies right from the beginning. Then we go to other companies who make like bolder claims, like OpenAI, and not only they plan for AGI, but they plan for beyond AGI, and they kind of like do pioneer research on path to AGI. And then Microsoft, for example, like in 2023, like right after or maybe early 2022 or 2023, they published this paper called Sparks of Artificial General Intelligence. Of course, we know that Microsoft backs OpenAI, so it's not a surprise that like the most popular, the most influential, cutting-edge AI system in AI, the way OpenAI people talk about it, would also be the way that people in Microsoft talk about it. And since then, there are like a lot of other AI companies, like NVIDIA, etc., that you won't think about them as AGI companies, are now building up AGI kind of like research institutes. And so, of course, this notion of AGI, we can have another talk, another session talking about what does it mean to talk about AGI. And so there's no one definition for AGI, many different perceptions of this notion. But when people started talking a lot about artificial general intelligence, artificial superintelligence, historically and philosophically, as you will see, the risks that would kind of come out from the systems were conceptualized as existential risk of AI. So when suddenly we got this success with ChatGPT being developed by a company that its vision is AGI, Google DeepMind's vision is AGI, then people started talking about AGI. And then, of course, talking about AGI, when you want to think about the risk of AGI, the risk is conceived in the literature as the existential risk of AGI. So then a lot of people started talking about existential risk of AGI, and then they started like publishing, this like statements that have been published by like Jeffrey Hinton, Yoshua Bengio, and also, of course, people from these labs. And so basically they say mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority. And risk of extinction, as we will see, is one type of existential risk from AI. So you see by this statement, we can't say it's an open letter because it's just one sentence, but by publishing this statement, like a lot of people, and this statement being signed by important people, talk about existential risk of extinction, went much more mainstream. Okay, and so in the UK, where I'm based, the Prime Minister started talking about existential risk from AI, risk of extinction from AI. Of course, then you can imagine who were the people who would give him advices and etc. But basically, a lot of discussions about existential risk of AI came into the discussion. And of course, it's not just discussion. It also means that a lot of resource allocation would go towards the way we think we should mitigate existential risk from AI, AGI. Okay, so now I talked a little bit about what do we mean by the ethical risk of AI, societal risk of AI, pre-ChatGPT kind of like era. And again, just to remind you, those are the risk of AI systems that kind of we can, in a tangible way, make sense of them. Like risk of misinformation, risk of like labor market, kind of like a significant disruption, like risk of discriminatory bias. There are things that kind of like make sense. All of us either have seen it in our life, or we there are some reporters, some journalists who have revealed cases on them. They're kind of immediate risks here and now. But now existential risk from AI, there's been like a lot of interesting books and writings about risk of extinction from technology, existential risk, etc. But in the recent literature, this notion became super popular when Nick Bostrom, like 11 years ago, published this book called Superintelligence. And so in this book, he kind of discussed how basically says that existential risk are risks which lead to the destruction of humanity's potential. And there are Toby Ord in a more recent book called Precipice kind of gives a more refined categorization of existential catastrophes. So again, existential risk result in existential catastrophes. What are the types of existential catastrophes? According to Toby Ord, there are catastrophes that result in humanity's extinction, they result in unrecoverable collapse or unrecoverable dystopia. So let me give you an example, again, coming from these authors. Next slide. Okay, so here's an example. So imagine that we have a pandemic and this pandemic kills everyone. This is an example of humanity's extinction. Humanity goes extinct. Unrecoverable collapse, what do we mean by it? Like we have a scenario where the pandemic kills 7 billion people and causes permanent collapse. It means that for the remainder of the people, it's kind of like not easy to kind of stand up and continue the civilization, like whatever that means. That's an instance of unrecoverable collapse. And unrecoverable dystopia, I'm not sure if it's dystopia or not, but according to these people, it's a case where the people decide to lock in and never expand beyond the solar system. And so, but by the way, just to be clear, this image and these examples are coming, I think, from an effective altruism forum. It's not coming from Bostrom and Ord's kind of books, but it's just a nice visualization just to convey what this sort of catastrophes could look like. Okay, so different kinds of existential disasters we can have. Some of them could be due to natural events, like we have a super volcanic eruption. Some of them could be due to anthropogenic threats, like nuclear conflict between different states. And some of them could be because of emerging threats, like advanced AI system or super intelligent AI system that we can't control. It's uncontrollable. And so in the rest of the talk, when I talk about existential risk, I just mean the risk, existential risk or existential threats being originated by advanced AI or super intelligent. Okay, so again, just for reference, there are these two books, Superintelligent by Nick Bostrom, again, that made this notion of existential risk from AI very popular. This book by Toby Ord, The Precipice, is not focused really necessarily on AI systems. It talks about different types of existential risk, but also refers to AI. And of course, there's been a lot of speculation and a lot of scholarly work about where did these ideas of Nick Bostrom came from. And there's a interesting AGI researcher called Ben Goertzel, and I talk about it in the paper in my manuscript if you read it, who kind of says that actually this researcher called Eliezer Yudkowsky kind of wrote about a lot of ideas in his book, in different kind of like popular media, forums, etc. He never published like academic pieces. And so Nick Bostrom in this book kind of gave some structure, like a beautiful analytic structure to what Eliezer Yudkowsky kind of had said before. Basically, then Ben Goertzel says that he hasn't found any super new idea in Nick Bostrom book that hasn't been mentioned by Eliezer. And so Eliezer, if you follow him on Twitter or if you read his blog posts, etc., he literally says things like AGI is going to kill everyone and like controlling AGI is very difficult. And I think at first I thought that he talks in a metaphorical language, but I think he really means what he says. Okay, so then how should we think about this existential risk really like impacting us? Two hypothetical examples. Again, these are hypothetical examples, but everyone refers to them when they want to talk about existential risk. One of them became popularized by Bostrom. So it's known as paperclip maximizer. The situation is something like this. We have an AI system whose only goal is to make as many paper clips as possible. So that's the objective built into this AI system. And then the AI will realize quickly that it would be much better if there were no humans, because humans might decide to switch it off. Because if humans do so, then there would be fewer paper clips, and also human bodies contain a lot of atoms that could be made into paper clips. So the future that the AI would be trying to gear towards would be one in which there were a lot of paper clips but no humans. And then if you imagine that this kind of like AI system has a lot of power, then this AI systems could kill humans. So it means that this AI system poses some existential risk to humanity. That is how the ideas are imagined and formulated. But then if we go back a little bit, we see a very similar kind of case study, a bit maybe less exciting, more nerdy, coming from Marvin Minsky, the founder of the AI lab at MIT. And so one of the very early kind of like founding figures of artificial intelligence as a field. So he also has this example where he says, we have an advanced AI, it's designed to solve the Riemann hypothesis. That is the goal, again, the objective. But let's say the AI is not constrained in any meaningful way, and it has a lot of power to take action in the world. And so it decides to take over all of Earth's resources to build supercomputers to help achieve its goal. And so again, this AI system can kill all of humanity or result in humanity's extinction. So again, these two examples, especially the Bostrom like paperclip example, is this example that captures the imagination as soon as people hear about existential risk from artificial general intelligence or superintelligence. Okay, now both Ord and Bostrom, of course, have a very sophisticated view of like risks. And so they think that we can think about risk across two main dimensions. One is the scope, the dimension of scope, and the other one is the dimension of severity. And if you see at the top right of this figure, there is like existential risk, and existential risk is the risk of those events that has the highest scope and the highest severity. And very interesting that this risk is kind of like sort of independent from all the other risks, as if there could be this event that is kind of result in existential risk or existential catastrophe. And Toby Ord actually says that, this is a quote from his book, he says that I take on the usual sense of catastrophe as a single decisive event rather than any combination of events that is bad in some. A true existential catastrophe must by its very nature be the decisive moment of human history, the point where we fail. And this is a very interesting characterization of existential risk because, for example, if you think about climate change being an example of existential catastrophe, it doesn't seem like it is this one single moment in time that this catastrophe is going to happen. The catastrophe unfolds over time, like gradually, etc. Okay, but that's not the sort of existential catastrophes that Toby Ord talks about. Okay, so then it means that if we want to kind of like summarize what these researchers like Nick Bostrom and Toby Ord have told us about existential risk from artificial superintelligence or general intelligence or advanced AI, we can maybe summarize it in the following hypothesis. That existential risk from artificial superintelligence, that's what I mean by ASI, concern the possibility of these abrupt, large-scale events that lead to humanity's extinction or cause an unrecoverable decline in its potential. So it seems like then from their perspective, if we want to think about existential risk, existential catastrophe from advanced AI, from their perspective, this is how we have to think about existential risk about AI. Okay. Now, as an undergrad, I studied like system engineering. And so when I was like reading and thinking about the notion of existential risk, there's this question that like this assumptions that I found being kind of like absent from this whole discussions that like, okay, this existential catastrophe or artificial superintelligence, they are all developed in a system, in the global system, in a complex system. And so they need to act within this system, right? So there are some constraints in the systems, etc. So how can we think about this existential catastrophe getting unfold? So I started thinking about the causal path that can give rise to existential risk from AI, because in some sense, it's not that this artificial superintelligence is acting in vacuum. It's going to act, if it is going to act, it's going to act in the world that we are living in. And this world is defined across many different kinds of structures, like global geopolitical structure, like computational like infrastructures, and like a lot of economic structures, etc. So how would those things play a role in the way we think about existential risk from AI? And just to go a little bit quantitative, or just to say why it's very important to think about these notions, a lot of people calculate somehow this existential risk of AI. So if you go to Silicon Valley, one of the funny questions that people ask you if you go to a party, like the first question is like, what is your probability of doom? What does it mean? What is the probability that you think that artificial superintelligence would give rise to human extinction or something like that? And so we know as mathematicians that whenever you want to calculate the probability of something, you need to have a list of all of the possible events, right? And so how come the researchers like Nick Bostrom, Toby Ord haven't give us all of the, possible kinds of events that can give rise to this existential catastrophe? And so how do those numbers come from? So for me, there was a lot of like unanswered kind of like mysterious questions in this space. So I thought, okay, if you want to think about them, let's assume what kind of systemic assumptions these researchers have in mind, even if they don't explicitly mention. And I kind of like extracted 3 types of systemic assumptions. So one is that they assume a system like paperclip maximizer is going to have this like rapid cascading event within humanity. And so these researchers love to talk about humanity. I'm not sure if I fully understand what is humanity, but let's talk in their language. So yeah, there's going to be this rapid cascade effect within humanity triggered by artificial superintelligence. And it means that these systems have the capacity to redirect and dominate global resources by any means necessary. So all of the guardrails that we have in the world, all of the cool cybersecurity measures that we have in place and etc., seems like they're not going to be effective. Another kind of assumptions that they make, which is very interesting, is that they think there is this connectedness of all of the humanity to artificial superintelligence. So there are, let's say, a third of the world which do not have access to kind of internet as of 2023. So more than 2 billion people in the world do not have access to internet. So then how come as artificial superintelligence, which is going to probably act on a digital platform, is going to kill all of humanity? But that's another kind of question. So if we think that there is somehow going to kill all of humanity, it means that there is an assumption that these systems are somehow going to reach humanity in general. I call it like super connectedness, means that systems are connected to like every element necessary for existential catastrophe to happen. And the third assumption is that it seems like the global world that in which this whole event is happening can't adapt to the actions of artificial superintelligence. So the systemic adaptation then is kind of like has a sort of unidirectional feedback loop. It doesn't stop these kind of systems. Okay, so these are the assumptions related to this decisive AI exercise hypothesis. And again, just to summarize, decisive AI exercise hypothesis is an assumption or is a view that we get from these conventional discussions about artificial superintelligence and existential risk from them. And also just to give credit, again, as I've written in the manuscript, there are a lot of other people who have tried to develop different versions of this artificial superintelligence giving rise to existential catastrophe. They've tried to think about these questions in more realistic ways. And again, I refer to those people in my paper. But I think it's very important still to talk about this conventional view about existential risk, because that is the view that captures the imagination of the public, and it's the main kind of narrative. Okay, so then I think in contrast, or in addition to this decisive AI exercise hypothesis, we can introduce another hypothesis for existential risk from AI, which I call it accumulative AI exercise hypothesis. And this hypothesis says that the X risk from AI accumulate through a series of lower severity disruptions. So when they occur, we don't think like, oh, they're existential. We don't label them as existential. But when they kind of accumulate over extensive duration, they slowly kind of erode some systemic resilience until some stressor event triggers an unrecoverable collapse. So that is a notion of existential risk that I think we need to focus on if we want to focus on existential risk from AI. So there are some people who say we should ban talking about existential risk from AI, and they have their reasons. And then my claim here is not that we have to talk about existential risk, definitely. I'm saying that if we want to talk about existential risk, we need to take this scenario very seriously. And this scenario is going to make a relation between ethical risk and existential risk. So existential risks are not tied to artificial superintelligence, but they're tied to more reasonable or like more realistic kind of scenarios or risks that can happen around us. Okay, now I'm going to say a little bit more about this notion. So again, thinking about it from a systemic kind of like perspective, the question is like, what kind of systemic assumptions should underlie this accumulative AI-induced hypothesis? And in other words, it means what kind of causal path we should assume that occur until this existential catastrophe happen according to this accumulative story. And I give an example of this like in the next few slides, but just first talking about the assumptions. So the first is that the assumption is that we're going to have some sort of local causality with compounded systemic impact. We are not going to have this paperclip maximizer that is going to kill all of humanity. No, we are living in a very complex like global system, and then it makes more sense, or it sounds more reasonable to consider local causality within the system. The second assumption is that if we buy into this scenario, this accumulative scenario, we only need to commit to some selective connectedness of infrastructure. We don't need to assume that there is this super intelligence that is connected to everything and can kill everything. No, it's going to happen like locally. And then the third assumption is that there is going to be some back and forth between resilient system that we build and the AI systems that we have, and then the kind of interplay between them is going to make this going forward. Okay, so now how can we think about this scenario in a more concrete way? The example I'm going to tell you is not as clean and as nice as a paperclip maximizer, and I think the reason is that that example is very smart because it's very simple, but the real world is not very simple. So the example that I'm going to bake in here is not a simple example, as simple as that one. But basically, the idea here is that I want to propose a scenario in which you have an accumulation of all these instances of ethical risk, and then you're going to have this situation of accumulative existential risk scenario. Okay, so yeah, I call it in the paper like a perfect storm, Mr. Thought experiment. And perfect storm, I don't know how many of you have watched or the movie Perfect Storm, or have read the story, the book called Perfect Storm. It's a story about a situation, perfect storm, where a series of seemingly manageable events in a rare combination give rise to this scenario where it becomes non-manageable. And so yeah, like it's very easy to imagine that it is now 2035, and then we have an kind of exaggeration of all of the problems we have with current generative models in a global world, like in a much more extensive way. We have global mass surveillance, we have loads of insecurities, we have loads of informational manipulation, and we get economic destabilization. And so all of this, again, as I say, can be considered as an exaggeration of the stuff we have. Like we already have some systems of global surveillance in some countries, right? And so it's not too hard to imagine that these systems can get more extensive, etc. Okay, so the idea here then is that you have these kind of problems, separated problems that doesn't sound existential, but there is a moment of perfect storm where there's gonna be like a power shut down in 3 continents, and then that gonna kind of result in a series of events where chaos happens, and then we have different kinds of military devices, very advanced military devices, and so a sort of a chaotic situation can happen. So I think I overspoke. I want to like go quickly, but in the paper I explain more about this this kind of scenario. Okay, so yeah, so then to summarize what I have said is that I've said, okay, if you want to think about existential risk, you need to take this accumulative view of existential risk that make a connection between ethical risk and existential risk very seriously, for various reasons. And here I mentioned a couple of practical implications. So one of them is that, next slide. So one of them is that there's this discussion between like how we have to evaluate this risk of existential risk and non-existential risk, and how we have to make different teams in different companies or research centers. At the moment, there is a lot of dichotomy. So there are some teams or some groups of people who focus on existential risk mitigation, and then I think that dichotomy should be broken down. So some of the examples are just as manifestations, like media appearing manifestations of this dichotomy. There's this piece that has been written about paper clips, the example I mentioned, and parrots. This metaphor is coming from this paper called Stochastic Parrots, written by a couple of AI ethicists, and they basically said language models are like stochastic parrots, and then they raise some of the risks that fall from the systems. So basically, like a lot of fight between these different communities of people. Again, if you just navigate through kind of Twitter in this space, you can get a headache and just come out, like how the people talk over each other. Some people think they are thinking about existential risk, and some other people just talk about like ethical risk is not as important as existential risk, etc. So if we think about this accumulative notion of existential risk, I think part of that dichotomy could be broken down. Next slide. And again, just other pieces, you know, like there's some dangers, and then there's this in the UK when AI Safety Summit wanted to happen. A lot of people associate AI safety with existential risk for various sociological reasons, and then a lot of AI ethics people were not first invited. And then gradually some of them were invited, and apparently the conversation became a little bit more nuanced. But that's one of the issues. And then again here, a lot of the engineers wrote to the Prime Minister in the UK saying that you need to talk about ethics. And by ethics, they mean community of researchers who work on ethical risk of AI, and not just AI safety, existential risk from advanced AI or artificial superintelligence. That's one thing. The second thing is this notion of existential risk quantification. So researchers who quantify or measure existential risk, they have many different tools. Lots of them Bayesian, lots of them subjective probabilities. And also they use some methods of super forecasting. I'm still learning about it. And so I think in a lot of those scenarios, again, the focus, as I mentioned, explicated by Toby Ord, the focus is on those events that suddenly give rise to these existential scenarios, extinction scenarios. And these numbers apparently come from those areas. I mean, it's very interesting because, for example, according to this calculation, I think this one is coming from Toby Ord's book, the risk of extinction from or existential catastrophe from unaligned AI is 1 in 10. And the risk of extinction or existential catastrophe from climate change is 1 in 1,000. And so you can imagine, like, there's this question of where do these numbers come from? And then, of course, this number come from all of the assumptions you make about possible events, etc. So I think this notion of accumulative existential risk hypothesis hopefully would kind of change some of these numbers. And then there are the last, I think, practical implication is for AI governance and safety initiatives. Again, we need to measure and assess existential risk in relation to all the other risks. I think that's like so important. And there are a lot of publications coming out about how to govern AI, how to govern advanced AI. And so I think, again, in those publications, this notion hopefully is going to play some role. And then I'm working on a couple of papers on this area. Some of them are published, some of them not. If you want to collaborate or if you want to chat about things on this side, I'll be super happy to talk through. And thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much for this talk. It was very interesting. Yeah, I don't know if anyone has questions before.
Yes, I can. It reminds me the paper of Bostrom about the vulnerable world hypothesis. You know, with this, you pick a ball in a urn, and so he's looking into black ball in his paper, but there is also white ball, which are very safe, and gray ball. Does your accumulative risk concept is to say that many gray ball could become okay. That's a way to represent it by difference with one black ball. And but in the paper, he made a kind of typology, and there is I think the second category where there is not only one actor but many actor, um, and he says it's like it's an existential risk like a climate change, but stronger than climate change, and the risk comes because there is an accumulation of people, of agents. So my question of my commentary is, how do you distinguish your view with this view where there is also, in a way, a cumulative existential risk problem?
Yeah. No, I think the view is not different. And again, just to acknowledge, I wanted to say there is this view that I call it accumulative, which is in contrast to this conventional view about super intelligent killing all of us. And I totally agree with you that there's been a lot of researchers who have written. I haven't read this paper of Bostrom that you mentioned, but a lot of more like recent, like younger researchers who try to kind of work out different sort of stories. But I think, yeah, again, I think this distinction hasn't been introduced with some labels and hasn't been like worked out philosophically. So that's like really my contribution. Yeah, when I published this or just like released the manuscript, there were some there was one AI safety researcher that told me he thinks that okay, he agrees with what I say, and he's very happy that I've seen these things on the wall for so long, so I could write a treatise on this. And I'm totally fine with that. Like even if you imagine I just like brought some organization to these ideas out there, I think it's all good. But I think it's very important to have a distinction between these two notions because because I think we didn't have meaningful concepts that can kind of draw a distinction. I didn't want to say I believe in existential risk from artificial superintelligence. I don't think that's like too high. Like everything is uncertain, so there's a risk associated with it. But existential risk in this accumulative way to me sounds something much more reasonable to be concerned about. Yeah.
Maybe another comment. I was thinking if there are examples of accumulative risk in the history of humanity or animals, but maybe from the extension of certain species, it is you can explain it by an accumulative arm. If you, for instance, animals in megafaune in Australia a long time ago before human came, from their point of view, it was an accumulative risk probably, or is it only a direct one?
Yeah, that's the thing. I wanted to resist this idea that it's direct. I just want to say that we need to resist that idea. And exactly, I think this idea that it's a gradual process, it accumulates, and then some stress or event results in like some chaotic situation that we might not recover over it. That's maybe a more reasonable way, in my view, to think about existential risk from AI. And for that, you don't need to believe in super intelligence or general intelligence, whatever they are. It just could happen with advanced AI. We might not get to AI, artificial super intelligence, but still we can get to the existential risk from AI. And again, a lot of I think AI safety researchers agree with this idea. But I was also very surprised that when I released this paper, like I never had a paper that I shared on Twitter and I got more than 200 likes for it. And a lot of these people were from AI safety. And so I just realized, okay, it seems like this idea needed to be spelled out clearly. And so it's like I did it a little bit, at least the first steps towards that. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Any other question? Yeah, so I can take mine. Yeah, so maybe I can give a bit of background about my path. Like I was, I guess, like I read Bostrom maybe in 2016 or something like this. I was really, I was very compelled at the time by the ideas and yeah, a lot of the shift that I had was initially due to this, but then like yeah, I ended up disagreeing with a lot of the arguments and I felt like you explained extremely well why. So that's really nice. And from what I'm told now, so like it's really a sociological remark, but like I feel like this AI safety community has a few leaders, a few people that are very visible and are leading the discussion. But I'm told that there's a lot of disagreements, like in the layers underneath, and like the fact that many people liked your tweet, I think it reveals that this community is far from as homogeneous as they would claim to be.
I agree with you totally. Yeah. Yeah, because I think there are in some discussions there's this like AI safety people care about artificial superintelligence and existential risk from it. I totally agree with you. I think it's wrong. Maybe some years ago that was the case, but now the community is much bigger and it's much more epistemically diverse. I mean, I saw some of those people and those were like very reasonable people. And so I also didn't talk about relationships between existential risk, again, sociological side of it, to like AI safety or long-termism or effective altruism. I think those are very interesting questions and interesting sociological studies to do. But I don't have the knowledge of that. So I was just like, okay, if from a system engineering perspective, you just want to think about existential risk, what are two main ways about it? Like that was like the main question. But I think there are a lot of other interesting questions around this kind of like topic to explore.
Yeah. Another remark that I have, and others please interrupt me because I have too many questions. Another remark that I would have is just like building upon what Martin said. I think it could be nice, like if you gave historical examples of other cases, like maybe the collapse of Rome or I don't know what, where yeah, you could see that maybe there's a more like maybe there are cases where it's more abrupt, other cases where it's more accumulative. I think it would be nice to have a historical.
So one thing on that, I guess people like Bostrom and Ord don't think the collapse of Rome or those civilizational collapses as examples of existential collapse, because they're just like some civilizations went away and some other things replaced them. And I think the thing that they're concerned with is like humanity, like whatever that means. Like there's this intelligent beings, and so the collapse of them. So yeah, I thought about that it could be interesting to refer to specific kind of like category. Yeah, I didn't think about this animal case that Martin mentioned, which is very interesting. But I was thinking more about collapse of like Greek civilizations or Persian civilization, things like that. But again, according to these people who talk about existential risk, those are not examples of existential catastrophes because something else would replace them.
Maybe the case of, I don't know in English, Ile de Pâques, which is described in Jared Diamond. Ile de Pâques with a big sculpture. There was a civilization on an island and it totally collapsed. And from the point of view of this civilization, it's a total existential risk because it was on an island. So yeah.
That's a very good point, and I agree with you. I think the problem, or maybe the kind of intelligent item that these researchers, these authors built into this, is that they talk about existential risk to humanity. So then it seems like they want to kind of talk about this universal or objective way. So it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter if a civilization gets collapsed in Mexico or Latin America or Vietnam or Middle East or something. Like, of course, for them it's existential, but not from this like objective perspective that measures humanity and etc. And again, the ideas are all built into normative assumptions about long-term future of humanity and long-termism and things like that. So yeah, I think I think that those authors would say the example that you are referring to for them is not an example of existential catastrophe. But I agree with you; it is absolutely an example of existential catastrophe from the perspective of those people. Yeah.
Maybe another example I can think of is nuclear weapons. Like there are near misses that happened, and you can make the case that it was not decisive, even though like the push of the button is like
yeah. So I think most of the interesting cases like climate change or nuclear war, I mean, it's gonna be if an existential catastrophe happen out of them, it's gonna be gradual. I mean, with climate change, we already have instances of parts in Philippines that are not livable anymore, like and then the distribution of water in parts of Middle East. So gradually things are happening. But again, I heard that in some conversations, some people originally, I think Toby Ord is changing his views, but at some point he was saying that yeah, even climate change is not gonna give rise to existential catastrophe because let's say 20%, 10% of the world would die, but that's not gonna be like 150% of the world that needs to die or needs to go extinct for the existential catastrophe to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, Xavier has a question. We cannot hear you.
Yeah, it's better.
Yeah,
possibly. Yeah, thanks for that presentation. Hello, that was passionate. I was wondering if there were discussions about existential risk and the probabilities of such a risk, and linked with the theory of the great filter. Like the fact that at some point, so I'm not sure, I'm not a physicist, nor a mathematician, nor a philosopher for that matter, so I'm not sure if I describe it well, but the theory according to which when a civilization becomes really, really, really advanced, so technologically advanced that it's so powerful that there will necessarily be a filter, something that will make it disappear completely. And this would be the reason and the explanation of the Fermi paradox, which from this Italian physicist saying that we don't see any extraterrestrial civilization. It's because they were so advanced, or there must be a reason why we don't see them. And that an explanation could be this great filter, the fact that at some point, necessarily, you will be so advanced that you will disappear because there will be, there will be an incident or perhaps an accumulative, series of events. So I was wondering if it was part of the conversation at the moment.
Oh, that's super interesting. I actually didn't think about it. And I also would love to do something a bit more formal and quantitative on this space. So if any of you are interested, maybe we should do something together on this.
Yeah, sure.
And Javier or anyone else, I would love that. Yeah, I think that sounds great. That sounds interesting. Although, so I'm not familiar with this theory that you're suggesting, but are you suggesting that there's this hypothesis saying that at some point the an advanced civilization, advanced humanity or species or something would end itself? Is that the message of the poster?
Yeah, basically. It's like you increase with technological advancements, you each time increase the probability of your own extinction, like until at some point it's 100% probability that you're going to extinct and it happens. I mean, this is pretty depressing thought, but yeah, that's one theory among others.
Yeah. No, I think I'm pretty sure some people in this so I have to say I'm very new to this space of existential risk, and I always I read about it, but I kind of ignored it because I thought, I'm more interested in problems that I can understand a bit more clearly. But then I thought, okay, it's actually important to have a view on this, and you can't say I don't like it or something. That's not a good answer from a researcher. so I started reading it, and then when I started reading it, I realized, there's this whole field of existential risk studies, and there are a lot of researchers who publish in journals like Future Studies and like loads of papers there. I haven't read many of those papers, so the field, I think, is very, very extensive. And what you're suggesting seems to actually kind of suggest that we need to think about existential risk much more carefully. So it seems like it's a justification for why we need to actually think about existential risk carefully. Maybe if you send me a reference to that to a piece of writing, or what was it called? What was the name of the theory again?
So it's the Great Filter. So yeah, I haven't read books about it, but mostly on the internet,
Okay.
of course. And yeah, I just copied the link to the Wikipedia
okay, perfect.
article.
Yeah, I'll definitely read it. Thank you.
No, I don't know if Martin, you wanted to talk about collapse. You shared a reference.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Martin.
Yeah, so
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. I don't know if you talk about it in the beginning, but it was this definition about existential risk. Why is it so important that it is 100%? For example, if there is a new human being or human society in March, for example, it's still for me it's still an existential risk, even if we know that there are human people in another place. So for example, on the island or on an island, or if it's 10% or 20%, why is it so important, this 100%?
Because it's defined like that.
Okay.
So it's defined like that. And also it's not 100%. So it's like, I think it's more like, if it's 50% of the world disappears, it's like a risk of unrecoverable collapse. And if it's 100%, then it's extinction. Yeah, so that's the thing. So one reason that actually I really started thinking about it is just, I looked at those numbers and those calculations, and I was not sure where did they come from. And so of course, after this statement about the extinction risk from AI came out, there are people like Yoshua Bengio who would put numbers on the risk of extinction from AI, and like very credible, loads of credible researchers. And I felt like, okay, I'm not an AI like a expert or something, but I studied with Le like operations research and just like the engines of machine learning. I think we know about it. So I felt like I just have no idea where those numbers come from. And then, of course, when you look at 101 probability, you need to have this list of possible events, right? And then you need to define your subjective beliefs in this, but you need to have a proper, complete list. And then I was just like, okay, what kind of list they're assuming? And I just couldn't find any answer to these questions. It seems like it's an expression of expert opinion, right? But we need much more than that. If you put numbers out, you need much more than, oh, I'm an expert, so what the opinion I express is right. And then I saw, okay, like it seems like there's also this super forecasting approaches, which is super popular. And I'm still learning it, but it has a lot of like Bayesian engine into it. But I think it's more than that. And so there are some super forecasters who perform very well on some tournaments, and then it feels like if you perform very well on some tournaments, then we need to take your views, if you're expert about existential risk from AI, seriously. It's a very interesting, let's say, computational space to dig in. I totally agree with you, and I think there's like a lot of questions about the interpretations of this mathematical machinery, and whether this mathematical machinery at some point is being misused or what is happening there. But yeah, it's a good question. Short answer, it's been defined like that. Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know if you know this, but my first book is about Bayesianism.
Yeah. Have you worked on super forecasting there?
I mean, I don't know it that well. Like I
Okay.
read the book, I looked at it a bit at this, but not a lot more. I don't know if there's other questions. Otherwise, I have another. I know. Do you know the book? This is how they tell me the world ends.
No.
So it's a book that sounds like an X-Risk existential risk book. So I put a link in the chat. But it's actually about cybersecurity. And so I saw that you mentioned cybersecurity in your how you call it, the perfect storm scenario. And yeah, I mean, this book, this is how they tell me the world ends. It's a book that really changed my worldview. Like it's really one of these books
Wow.
that, and it's so scary. It's extremely scary.
Yeah. It's good because I was watching recently the Mr. Robot series. Yeah, I think so. You know, a lot of people, at least some people that I know, who would question this AI safety like concerns. They say, aren't these just cybersecurity concerns that we've had over time? And now it's for these new versions, the systems that we just don't know how to control them. So if you think about it from this cybersecurity perspective, yeah, it's very scary, but you don't need to bake in a lot of weird metaphysical assumption about the system. Just advanced cybersecurity, you know, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, very cool. I'm definitely gonna read this book. Absolutely.
Yeah, and like one thing that so like I did research more in like in security of machine learning, and the standards of of security in machine learning are abysmal. Like they are very, very bad. Like people, it's like people don't care at all about security, and you have like so many ways that these systems can be attacked, and they are being attacked all the times.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like this book is already extremely scary for classical information systems, but now we're building even less secure systems and we're deploying them at scale.
Yeah.
So that was a very
Yeah.
concern.
No, it's very interesting, especially like when you look into the evaluation, the way we are evaluating this multimodal systems. I mean, even language models.
Yeah.
Like we are so behind, right, in evaluating
Yeah.
it in a robust way, right? Like there are all these like red teaming approaches, etc. But you don't have a provable guarantee. Like you don't have a formal guarantee that says you definitely not gonna see any kind of cybersecurity breaches or something. You just probe it, and I mean these multi-dimensional spaces, embedding spaces, are crazy. And then there's a question of whether these probings are enough to kind of tell us. Yeah.
So I can tell you that. So I submitted a paper to ICMR, like one of the top conferences recently, and it was the scariest theorem I've ever proven.
What does it say?
So it says that if you have a high dimensional system, so many parameters, even if you use a state-of-the-art defense mechanisms against data poisoning, so I don't know if you're familiar with data poisoning, then essentially it's hopeless. Like it does, like the defense does nothing. Like it's still arbitrarily manipulable. So I'll talk about arbitrary model manipulation by like a handful of poisoners. And that's like intuitively, like the attackers are like square root of D. So D is the number of parameters. The attackers are like square root. Each attacker is like square root of D times stronger than the honest data. And yeah, so you can do the computations. Like if you assume that 1% of the data are like compromised, which like on Facebook, like for recommender systems is like an underestimation by far. Even with 1%, then as soon as your model has more than 1 million parameters, it's like arbitrarily manipulable.
Wow. Can you send me the paper?
So I'll send
Also,
you the paper.
also, I don't know if you've seen this paper, but I was in the talk. The like Zico Kotler gave this amazing talk about adversarial attacks on language models, and they kind of empirically prove a little bit some of the stuff that you're saying, that like we just don't have. And so that his message was like, it's not it's not possible to kind of like control, like, or like the adversarial attacks, but like let's keep trying.
Yeah, so I didn't know about this paper in particular, but I know like Nicola Carlini is doing a lot of work in this area. But yeah, Mehdi, my co-author, has also a paper about like, so my paper is purely theoretical, linear regression and stuff like this. But like Mehdi and this paper are doing like a empirical study, and they found that with like a tiny fraction of the poisoning data, you can do an enormous amount of harm, which is very scary.
Wow.
Yeah, so like to me, like the misuse, so like the hack of these systems, it's funny as well. Like people talk about safety, but so now I talk about security to distinguish myself from them. But like in their safety, they don't even consider a lot of actual attacks, classical cyber attacks on the systems.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because now there are some people trying to say we need to think about AI safety in terms of system safety, and that kind of like and in some sense it's surprising that we are not thinking about AI. Because AI is a technology, and you always had all these kinds of security, system security for all technologies, and why AI is a different thing, right? It's yeah. Thanks so much, Oscar, for being here.
Yeah, I have to go too, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Yeah, so we have another question, another kind of question to say. So I've grown extremely concerned recently about pornographic deepfakes. And I think this is like like I try to call this a systemic risk, because in the AI Act there's a particular section about systemic risks. But yeah, like I wonder if it could even be called like maybe not an existential risk according to classical definitions, but if like in a society anyone can easily harass, so I call them like weapons of psychological destruction. And if everyone has a weapon to psychologically destroy anybody else, like it feels like a huge risk. Like I don't know how you put it in the framework, but
I think with the misinformation, I included some stuff about deepfake. But yeah, I think the new revelations, I mean, empirical findings, that it's also really sad for me. What is really sad is that civil society should find about the significance of these risks. So instead of the companies like raising the bell and saying like, look, they just say, look, there's a risk of misinformation, but they don't tell us that, well, it actually can be used in schools, like pornographic deepfake videos can be used against women and children, and like all of that, like, no, it's other researchers should go and study them, which is really like says something, right, about the ecosystem.
I saw a study, like I didn't look at it in details, but that estimated that 96% of deepfakes are like pornography.
Yeah, it's I also, when I saw that number, I was shocked, because I was just like, that can't be.
Yeah.
It's horrible, like it's unbelievable. But there's actually a new like open letter about the regulation requirement for regulation of deepfake pornography that was released some days ago. I don't know if you've seen it or not. I will share it with you, and I think it's a very reasonable kind of, and they want to like have more than 100,000 people to sign it to bring some attention. I think it's a pretty good open letter. I share it with you, and then you can maybe I can share it here, so if other people also want to sign it. It's called Disrupting, this one. Okay, let me share it here.
Yeah, I guess another thing that so I guess one of the things that annoyed me the most about the AI safety community, quote unquote, is so I'm extremely concerned about the recommendation algorithms. I think they are the most dangerous by far, I think, today, because they have so much influence. Like people actually swipe, scroll, and click rather than chat with ChatGPT. And so I'm really scared about recommendation AIs, and I feel like the arguments about the paperclips argument, like it applies to recommendation AIs. Like they just want you to click on things, and if you pull their argument, like you try to go their way. Like it seems like it should be something dangerous. Like I've been arguing a lot also, like the AGI framework, mathematically it's like reinforcement learning, and like recommendation systems are doing reinforcement learning. I think people underestimate how sophisticated these systems and how much they know. Like they do psychological profiling of 2 billion people. They consume all of the content that's uploaded on the internet. On YouTube, it's like 1 century of content every day. So that's a huge amount of things that they're doing. And yet, like this community, they are really dismissive of the idea that recommendation AIs could be dangerous. I don't know if that has changed.
Yeah, I think there is a really good researcher. Maybe you know him. He's at MIT, Dylan Manel Hatfield.
Yeah, I know him. Yeah,
he's one of those people who's been in the AI safety community, but he's very concerned about recommender systems, and has his So I think he and his group are publishing some very interesting stuff about recommender system. But I agree, this should be mainstream, right? This should be like the problem that like everyone talks about.
So I talked to him a few times, and one of his PhD students like gave a Tournesol talk a few weeks ago. Yeah, that's nice.
Very cool. Great.
Good. So about, I'm trying to think whether maybe you have ideas of like how to like quantify more, or like add mathematics to your papers or your research.
I'm looking into this the calculations of the existential risk, like probability of doom, like how it's calculated. And I'm just like really like trying to still learn, because I think that would be for me the next stage, just to see how this is calculated and how we need to calculate it maybe differently, or like, I don't know. It's really weird, because when people say like, oh, the probability of extinction from AI is 5% or like 10% or something like that. Yeah, I mean, so it seems like we might agree, because it seems like if these systems are being used in recommender systems, if there's mass surveillance where you can't even like kind of go against the system, question the system, if there are all these cybersecurity problems, it's just a chaotic situation happened, right? But then it seems like, I'm really looking into how these numbers are calculated, and so I think that's a more it's going to be some formula, like some quantifications, but I'm also more interested in the assumptions that go through it, and then things like that. One other thing that I really love to look at it, which is a bit more, it needs more time, is that I said like this events happen in the systems, in a global system. So how can we think about this causal path in a more quantitative way? Like I talk about types of them, but yeah, exactly. Like the scenarios you are mentioning, that like, let's bring in the empirical knowledge that we have about recommender systems, about cybersecurity dangers. And then if we can put some numbers on those, then we can like bring maybe some attention to those kind of like problems. Yeah. But if you have any ideas and you want to collaborate on this, I will definitely get back to you on this. But yeah, I think it's very important to kind of go a little bit more, like, instead of just questioning like, oh, AI safety is wrong or something, just like proposing some suggestions, like this is how we have to talk about risk, this is rooted in mathematics, this is rooted in empirical phenomena that we are observing with recommender systems, cybersecurity threats, etc. And then I think a big part of that community is willing to pay attention to that. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I just feel that putting numbers like poverty numbers on this is just very hard.
Yeah.
Xavier has a question.
Yeah, I was wondering if there were models, a bit like the models from the the Meadows reports, like limits to growth in 1972, like which really made it really visual, like what would be the limits to growth and what ecological collapse and society collapse would look like. So, having this kind of nice graph where we go up, 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 and at some point, or the point where we have too much content or too much toxic content generated by AI or pushed by recommender systems, when would it happen? Would it happen first? And
yeah. So this is perfect. Yeah, I actually cited Meadows, and then in the open questions, I mentioned that it's very important to use this system dynamics approach and simulate some of these ideas, which is really great to hear from you. Yeah, I think it's really like very important to visualize some of these ideas and say, look, if this kind of scenario, like if we make these assumptions about the world that sounds okay, reasonable to make, we would observe something like that, like using more computer simulations to kind of visualize some of these claims. I think that's super important. Yeah, I think that's definitely the next stage to take it. So yeah, if you have if you want to do something on that, let me know.
Yeah, I'm not a researcher, so I'm from civil society. So
cool.
we are an NGO, and we work with other NGOs on hate speech, disinformation, and recommender system is a big concern for us.
Okay.
AI is in general, but yeah,
amazing
for sure. So yeah, really interested by all the research happening at the moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe thinking about modeling. So I guess one thing I should say is that the book I mentioned, This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends. One of the key ways it changed my worldview is that essentially before this book, I was very concerned about dictatorships and like monopolies and and I think this AI safety community has really this idea of a central AI that's very dangerous. So it's like very centralized risk. And what this book convinced me of is that the risk is actually more in the chaos. The fact that cyber attacks can come from anywhere. Same with pornographic deepfakes. The issue is that it's coming from everywhere. Anyone could more and more easily do this, and that's really more the danger. And I think similarly with all of these AIs, the generative AIs, like everyone has their own capability of doing a lot of harm. And like for cybercrime, there are like very terrifying figures about for instance, the damages in dollars of cybercrime every year.
Yeah, I was checking yesterday with cybersecurity costs. Actually, I was looking at this number. So in 2023, $8 trillion.
Yeah.
$8 trillion to combat the cybersecurity. Yeah. And then the expectation for 2024 is $9.5 trillion. Yeah. I also, when I saw these numbers, I was like, this is billion. Billion is already a lot, but like this trillion. Whoa.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And so I was actually, so I was on TV yesterday, and they were talking about like OpenAI trying to raise $7 trillion. But that's cybercrime is already having this.
Yeah, I think these numbers are so relative, right? It's just like in absolute, they just make no sense anymore.
Yeah, but yeah, and it's also growing exponentially, like these cyber crimes. So I don't know if there are like they can think of models of X risk that comes more from like the growth of more and more decentralized systems that are out of control. Like just throwing an idea.
No, this is a really, really, really good idea to model it a little bit more, because I think like Bostrom and like Toby Ord, I think he studied computer science, he told me, but Bostrom, but it was more philosophical. And then the formal work went when they wanted to quantify these notions. Whereas I think thinking about the scenarios on a modeling perspective itself is like super interesting, right? Like exactly, I think it would be much easier to visualize some of these ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe also there's an argument that I'm just thinking out loud, but you know, in like in cybersecurity, it's always lagging, like it's always behind, and there's this argument that could be made. I think that it was okay back then when it was lagging behind because it was not like we were not too dependent on the internet and stuff like this. But if you keep having this 5 years delay, let's say between like a deployed algorithm and the patch, let's say, because like the adoption and the scale of the consequences is growing more and more quickly. Like the 5 years delay back then was okay, but now like it's really dangerous. Like, yeah. Just to throw more ideas out there. I don't know if you looked a bit about like the theories of singularity. Like the basic one is that like it's an exponential. Like if you and basic argument is like better technology allows you to create better technologies. So you have this feedback loop. But there was there's this researcher Ray Solomonov who just assumed, for instance, that instead of having a linear return on improvement, but if you have a quadratic improvement, like so mathematically, like y prime is equal to y squared instead of just y or something like this, and then you really have a peak that grows because like you have a singularity. It's not exponential, like it's going too fast, so it's infinite time it diverges. Yeah, I guess like if you can, like from a modeling perspective, if you can find trends of these kind of things being super linear, like the derivative is larger than the linear function, these are also like things that could be interesting to raise alarms about.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah.
Good.
Great.
More question? No question left. I think we all good. Well, thank you a lot for this talk.
Thanks so much, Le, for inviting me and for having me, and thanks to everyone for being here and all the great questions. I hope that we continue the conversation, Le.
Yeah, definitely.
Offline, definitely, great.
Yeah, I think I look more into your papers and try to just think about this and tell you.
And if you share with me the other paper that you refer
yeah, we'll do.
I would also, yeah. Great.
Good. So thank you, everyone. And
thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.